Well, joining us now to discuss this is political commentator and broadcaster Bill Bowkett. Right, Bill, thank you so much for joining us. Happy New Year. Have you ever seen a year like it?
I think we have, because obviously I would say the last 5 years in itself have been pretty tumultuous, I would say, British politics. But last year was very much an extraordinary year because not only did you see, the society shift in such a way never seen before with, the vaccination program and ultimately Freedom Day. But what you're also seeing is the Tory support is now starting to dismantle, in having to dominate British politics for the last, for the entire 2010s, and now coming into the 2020s, and now into 2022, Boris Johnson's position, as Prime Minister is becoming more, untenable. The Tory support is dwindling among the electorate, and voters believe that Boris Johnson's not even going to last the entire year because he's seen not only as a liability for the Conservative Party and their electoral hopes, but also they don't feel that he's the necessary or the right leader for the occasion and the challenges that Britain is having to face at the moment.
I think, Bill, no matter who was in the Prime Minister's chair, it will be hard for anyone to deal with a pandemic. But I can remember the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, coming out, announcing Freedom Day and saying that we have to live with COVID. Looking back and where we are now, do you think that message has aged well?
I think it has, and then because at the time when the country was unlocking in 2021, the Tories did get a bit of a boost in terms of their polling. They did very well in the local elections. But I think what we're having at the moment with, what we're seeing with the Omicron variant is that I think ministers, and today, so Javed writing in the Daily Mail talking about Omicron and having to move forward from it. But I think ministers are starting to realise that, have to move on from the crisis itself and understand that people want to return to normality as much as possible, and that the current restrictions in place is not guaranteeing that, as the Prime Minister did back at July 19th. And I think at least the Prime Minister and ministers are confident that, as the year progresses, as Omicron, as we're seeing with some of the data, is becoming obviously less severe, and obviously the booster program is helping with that as well. That 2020 would be the year that hopefully the virus becomes, as ministers and backbenchers are hoping, an illness like the flu that we all live with and it won't dominate our lives. But obviously, as much as the Prime Minister wants to move on from coronavirus, he can't. He still has to, feel like he's acting in the best interest, of the current data and the interest of the health service. But also he isn't able to move on because he's, tussling in his own internal quarrels with his own political party and what's happening in Downing Street.
What do you think people want from their Prime Minister and the government going forward? We've seen so much happen in 2021, and particularly the back end of the year was very interesting for the government. We had the North Shropshire by-election. After almost 200 years, the seat went to the Liberal Democrats. That is that was a hard Brexit seat that has been given to a party that wanted to remain in the EU. Now, going forward, what do you think people want from their government?
I think for their government, they need two things. And I think that's always the case with any government. They want to show that they're delivering on their manifesto promises. And there was a report last month from the Institute for Government showing that the government has delivered or is on track to enact half of the promises from the 2019 manifesto. But obviously, the PM is still having to battle through with other issues like Brexit, particularly the Northern Ireland Protocol. But the other thing that they want is competence, and voters just don't see that in Boris Johnson at the moment. A lack of trust within government over sleaze and the Downing Street parties. There was the end of year survey actually that Ipsos Mori did into Boris Johnson. Feels 2/3 of voters think it's unlikely that Boris Johnson will see out 2022 as Prime Minister, and even half of Tories voters think it's unlikely that Boris will remain as Prime Minister in number 10 come the end of the year. So yeah, it's going to be a very difficult few months for him. But I think that's ultimately what voters want to see. If they can see a leader that is acting in the national interest and that is able to benefit people's lives, then that's, I think, what they want. But unfortunately, while the Conservative Party, might have is the dominating force in British politics in having to, change society and enact laws that will hopefully benefit people's lives, they don't see that Boris Johnson is the right man to lead it going forward.
Yeah, it certainly has been a challenging road for the Conservative Party and for Boris Johnson. A little earlier, Bill, we were talking about New Year's resolutions. I just want to know what your thoughts are. What do you think Boris Johnson's New Year's resolution will be this year?
His resolution, I think, is to regain trust within his, wider party, particularly his backbenchers. Reports that we saw in November and December about, backbench MPs sending letters to the 1922 committee because they feel that Boris Johnson is becoming a liability for the party. And having to backtrack on traditional Conservative policies like on taxes and also on levelling up. So I think that is key to look at those areas which are most of importance to constituent backbench MPs. And hopefully, if he can do that and that the party's behind him and supportive of him, then he has every success to battle through 2022 as Prime Minister.
Wow, big resolution then. Bill, good to chat to you. Thanks very much.